Forward to save her, the cargo freighter Dust Devil shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace above Kepler 442b, a frontier world that existed on the very edge of human civilization. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the small porthole, watching the rust-colored planet grow larger against the star-filled void. 3 years of running had brought her here, to this forgotten corner of space where questions weren't asked and pasts could be buried beneath red dust and endless horizons. Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the glass, hollow cheeks, dark circles under once bright eyes, and hair that had grown long and unkempt during months of travel. She barely recognized the woman she'd become, so different from the decorated officer who had once stood proudly on the bridge of the UES Valiant. That person felt like someone from another lifetime, someone who had believed in duty and honor before learning the terrible price of both. The freighter captain, a grizzled man named Torres, announced their approach over the ship's intercom. "Kepler station coming up, folks. End of the line for those getting off. Next ship out won't be for another 6 months, so make sure this is where you want to be." Sarah gathered her few belongings, a worn duffel bag containing everything she owned now. Inside were 3 changes of clothes, basic survival gear, and, at the very bottom, wrapped carefully in a piece of cloth, her old command insignia. She'd kept it not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of what she'd lost and why she could never go back. The station that served as Kepler 442b's orbital gateway was a ramshackle affair, clearly assembled from salvaged parts and held together more by hope than engineering. Sarah made her way through the cramped corridors, following signs toward the shuttle bay. The artificial gravity felt lighter than Earth standard, and she had to adjust her stride to avoid bouncing off the ceiling. At the shuttle terminal, she found herself among an odd collection of humanity's wanderers, miners seeking their fortune, scientists running from failed experiments, criminals looking for places where the law couldn't reach them. Sarah fit right in with the desperate and the displaced. The shuttle pilot was a woman in her 50s with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the planet below. "First time on Kepler?" she asked as Sarah strapped herself in. "Yes." "Got a place to stay lined up?" Sarah shook her head. She'd learned that having too many plans made it easier for people to track you. Better to improvise, to stay fluid, to be ready to run again if necessary. The pilot, who introduced herself as Maria Santos, studied Sarah with the kind of look that suggested she'd seen plenty of runners before. "There's a settlement called Redemption about 200 clicks from the main colony. Small place, but they don't ask too many questions. Might be what you're looking for." The name made Sarah laugh bitterly. Redemption. If only it were that simple. The descent through Kepler's atmosphere was rough, the shuttle bucking and shaking as it fought through layers of turbulent air. Through the small windows, Sarah watched the landscape unfold below, vast plains of red dirt broken by jagged rock formations and the occasional cluster of buildings that marked human habitation. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, like the surface of Mars might have been if it had kept its atmosphere. They landed at New Dallas, the planet's primary settlement, in the middle of what passed for afternoon under Kepler's orange sun. The air outside was thin but breathable, carrying the scent of dust and something that might have been sage. Sarah filled her lungs with it, tasting freedom and fear in equal measure. New Dallas was exactly what she'd expected, a frontier town that could have been lifted from the American West, complete with wide dirt streets, wooden buildings with false fronts, and the kind of saloons where men settled disputes with fists rather than lawyers. The only things that marked it as being on an alien world were the dome-shaped atmospheric processors scattered throughout the settlement and the strange quality of light cast by Kepler's sun. Sarah found lodging at a boarding house run by an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, who asked for payment in advance and no questions about the past. The room was small and Spartan, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto the main street. It was perfect for someone who needed to leave quickly if circumstances demanded it. That evening, Sarah made her way to the town's largest saloon, a place called the Lucky Strike. She wasn't looking for company or conversation, just a quiet corner where she could nurse a drink and observe the locals. Understanding the social dynamics of a place could mean the difference between blending in and attracting unwanted attention. The saloon was crowded with the kind of rough characters she'd expected to find on a frontier world. Miners still covered in dust from their shifts, ranchers in from the outlying settlements, and various entrepreneurs of questionable legality. Sarah found a table in the back corner and ordered whiskey, the real stuff shipped in from Earth at considerable expense. She was halfway through her second glass when the trouble started. A group of men near the bar had been getting increasingly loud and aggressive as the evening wore on. Sarah identified them as miners from their clothes and the way they threw around money, probably celebrating a good strike. The problem was that their celebration was making other patrons uncomfortable, particularly a young woman who was trying to eat her dinner in peace. The woman was clearly not local. Her clothes were too clean, her posture too refined, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from education and privilege. Sarah guessed she was a scientist or administrator, probably attached to one of the research stations scattered across the planet. The miners had noticed her too. Their leader, a big man with arms like tree trunks and a face that suggested he settled most arguments with violence, approached her table with the swagger of someone who wasn't used to being told no. "Well, looky here," he said loud enough for half the saloon to hear. "We got ourselves a fancy lady slumming it with us common folk." The woman looked up from her meal, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm just trying to eat my dinner in peace. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me alone." Her accent was educated, possibly from one of the inner worlds. Sarah felt a familiar knot form in her stomach, the same feeling she'd gotten just before everything had gone wrong on the Valiant. Some situations had a gravity all their own, pulling you in whether you wanted to be involved or not. "Peace?" The miner laughed, a harsh sound that made several other patrons look away uncomfortably. "Lady, this is the frontier. Peace is something you gotta earn out here." His friends were spreading out now, cutting off potential escape routes. Sarah recognized the tactic. These weren't just drunk miners having fun. They were predators, and they'd selected their prey carefully. The woman was alone, clearly didn't belong here, and probably had no one who would come looking for her if something happened. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her hip, where her sidearm would have been if she'd still been in the military. But she was just another drifter now, and getting involved would only draw attention she couldn't afford. She had her own problems, her own past to outrun. This wasn't her fight. The woman stood up from her table, moving with the kind of careful precision that suggested she was scared but trying not to show it. "I don't want any trouble. I'll pay for my meal and leave." "Oh, but we're just getting started," the miner said, reaching out to grab her arm. "See, my boys and we've been down in the mines for 6 months straight. Haven't seen a pretty face like yours in all that time. Seems a shame to let you walk away without getting properly acquainted." The woman tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. Around the saloon, other patrons were suddenly finding their drinks very interesting or discovering urgent business elsewhere. This was the frontier law at work: mind your own business, and maybe you'll live to see tomorrow. Sarah drained her whiskey and stood up. Every rational part of her mind was screaming at her to sit back down, to let someone else be the hero for once. She'd tried that before, and it had cost her everything. But, watching the fear in the woman's eyes, seeing the predatory grins on the miners' faces, she found that some things hadn't changed despite everything she'd been through. "Let her go." The words came out quietly, but, in the sudden hush that had fallen over the saloon, they might as well have been shouted. Every eye in the place turned toward Sarah as she walked slowly toward the confrontation, her boots clicking against the wooden floor. The miner leader looked her up and down, taking in her worn clothes and lean build. To him, she probably looked like just another drifter, someone who could be intimidated or brushed aside without much effort. "This ain't your concern, stranger," he said, not bothering to release the woman's arm. "Walk away, and we'll pretend this never happened." Sarah stopped about 6 feet away, close enough to act but far enough to avoid being grabbed easily. Her body settled into a stance that was second nature after years of military training, balanced, ready, hands loose at her sides. "I said let her go." The miner's expression shifted from dismissive to annoyed. "You got a hearing problem, lady? I told you to walk away. And I told you to let her go. Seems we're at an impasse." Something in Sarah's voice or posture must have warned him that this wasn't going to be as easy as he'd thought. His friends were watching now too, no longer just backup but actively interested in how this was going to play out. "You know what?" the miner said, finally, releasing the woman's arm and turning his full attention to Sarah. "Maybe you need to learn some manners. Boys, why don't you teach this lady how things work out here? Two of his friends moved towards Sarah from different angles, clearly experienced in this kind of intimidation. In the military, Sarah would have had backup, rules of engagement, and superior firepower. Here, she had only herself and whatever skills she'd managed to retain through 3 years of running. It would have to be enough. The first man reached for her shoulder, probably intending to grab her and make this into a wrestling match where his size would give him the advantage. Sarah stepped inside his reach instead, driving her elbow into his solar plexus with all the force she could muster. He folded around the blow, gasping for air. The second man was faster, getting his hands on her before she could fully reset her position. But Sarah had learned to fight in the confined spaces of starships, where there was always a bulkhead or control panel to use as leverage. She drove her heel into his instep while simultaneously striking upward with the palm of her hand, catching him under the nose. Blood sprayed as cartilage cracked, and his grip loosened enough for her to break free. The saloon was completely silent now except for the groans of the two men on the floor. The leader was staring at her with new respect and considerable wariness. "Who the hell are you?" Sarah straightened her jacket, her breathing carefully controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Someone who doesn't like bullies." For a moment, the situation balanced on a knife's edge. The miner had more men, but Sarah had just demonstrated that she wasn't helpless. Violence could still escalate, but it would be costly for everyone involved. That's when the saloon doors swung open, and a new voice cut through the tension. "Evening, folks. Everything all right in here?" The man who entered wasn't particularly large or imposing, but something about him made everyone in the saloon snap to attention. He wore simple work clothes, denim pants, a cotton shirt, and boots that had seen plenty of use. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but Sarah could see enough to note sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. "Just a little misunderstanding, Sheriff," the miner leader said, his aggressive posture melting away like ice in the sun. "Nothing that can't be worked out." "Sheriff." That explained the sudden change in everyone's demeanor. Sarah felt her own muscles tense involuntarily. She'd had enough encounters with law enforcement over the past 3 years to develop an instinctive wariness of anyone with a badge. The sheriff's gaze swept the scene, taking in the two groaning men on the floor, the frightened woman, and Sarah's defensive stance. When his eyes met hers, she saw intelligence there, and something else, a kind of weary compassion that suggested he'd seen too much of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and kindness. "Miss Rodriguez," he said to the woman, "are you hurt?" So he knew her. That was interesting. The woman Rodriguez shook her head. "I'm fine, Sheriff Martinez." "Thanks to." She looked at Sarah questioningly. "Sarah," Sarah said simply, not offering a last name. Sheriff Martinez nodded as if he hadn't expected one. "Well then, thanks to Sarah here. Tommy," he addressed the miner leader, "I think it's time you and your boys called it a night. Sleep off whatever you've been drinking, and maybe tomorrow you'll remember your manners." Tommy looked like he wanted to argue, but something in the sheriff's tone suggested that would be a very bad idea. He helped his groaning companions to their feet and herded them toward the door, pausing only to give Sarah a look that promised this wasn't over. As soon as they were gone, the normal sounds of the saloon resumed as if someone had turned up the volume on the world. Conversations restarted, glasses clinked, and the piano player in the corner began another tune. Sheriff Martinez approached Sarah and Rodriguez, his movements unhurried but purposeful. "Dr. Rodriguez, are you sure you're all right? Do you need medical attention?" "No, I'm fine." "Really?" Rodriguez was looking at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "I can't thank you enough. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." Sarah knew exactly what would have happened, but there was no point in spelling it out. Anyone would have done the same. "No," the sheriff said quietly, "they wouldn't have. Most folks out here have learned to mind their own business. Takes something special to get involved when it's not your fight." His words hit closer to home than Sarah was comfortable with. She'd spent 3 years learning to mind her own business, to look the other way when bad things happened to good people. Tonight had been an aberration, a momentary lapse back into the person she used to be. "I should go," she said, reaching for her jacket. "Wait." Dr. Rodriguez caught her arm gently. "At least let me buy you a drink. It's the least I can do." Sarah started to refuse, then reconsidered. She'd already drawn attention to herself tonight. Leaving abruptly might make her seem even more suspicious. Better to play the role of a good Samaritan for a little while longer. "All right. One drink." They found a quieter table away from the main crowd. Sheriff Martinez joined them, and Sarah found herself part of a conversation for the first time in months. Dr. Rodriguez Carmen, she insisted, was indeed a researcher, part of a team studying the planet's unique ecosystem. Sheriff Martinez had the thankless job of keeping the peace in a settlement where the nearest backup was light years away. "So what brings you to our little corner of paradise?" Carmen asked, and Sarah tensed despite the casual tone. "Just passing through," Sarah said, the same answer she'd given 100 times in 100 different places. Sheriff Martinez was studying her with those sharp eyes again. "Most people who are just passing through don't stay to help strangers in bar fights." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Like I said, anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." There was something in his voice that made Sarah look at him more carefully. She'd initially dismissed him as just another frontier lawman, but there was depth there, layers of experience and understanding that suggested he'd seen more of the universe than this small settlement would suggest. "You're not from around here either," she said, making it half question, half statement. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "What gave it away?" "The way you handle yourself. The way people respond to you. This isn't your first law enforcement job." "No, it's not." He didn't elaborate, and Sarah respected that. Everyone out here had their reasons for being so far from civilization. They talked for another hour, carefully avoiding personal histories while discussing everything else: the planet's weather patterns, the challenges of frontier life, the latest news from the inner worlds. It was the kind of conversation Sarah had almost forgotten she could enjoy, intellectual and engaging without being threatening. Finally, Carmen announced she needed to get back to the research station. "Thank you again, Sarah. I hope we meet again soon." After she left, Sheriff Martinez lingered, nursing his beer and studying Sarah with that unsettling intensity. "You know," he said finally, "redemption could use someone like you." "Like me?" "Someone who's willing to stand up when others won't. Someone with skills." Sarah's hand tightened around her glass. "I'm not looking for work." "Maybe not. But maybe work is looking for you." He stood up, tipping his hat politely. "Think about it. This is a good place to start over, if that's what someone was looking for." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the gradually emptying saloon, staring into her whiskey and trying to figure out what had just happened. She'd come to Kepler 442b to disappear, to become just another anonymous face in the crowd. Instead, she'd managed to get involved in a bar fight, saved a stranger, and apparently caught the attention of the local sheriff. All the instincts that had kept her alive for 3 years were screaming at her to leave. To catch the next transport off-world and find somewhere else to hide. But something else, some part of herself she'd thought was dead and buried, was whispering that maybe it was time to stop running. She walked back to the boarding house through streets lit by the alien constellations of Kepler's night sky, her footsteps echoing in the empty darkness. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether Sarah Chin was finally ready to stop being a fugitive and start being a person again. In her small room, she pulled out the cloth-wrapped bundle from the bottom of her duffel bag. The command insignia gleamed dully in the lamplight, 3 silver bars that had once represented everything she believed in. She'd kept them as a reminder of her failures, but now she wondered if they might represent something else entirely. Outside her window, the frontier town of New Dallas slept under alien stars, full of people who had come here seeking second chances. Maybe, Sarah thought as she carefully rewrapped the insignia, it was time to find out if redemption was more than just a name on a map. Sarah woke to the sound of shouting in the street below. The orange light of Kepler's dawn was filtering through her window, and the urgent voices carried a tone of panic that made her instantly alert. She'd learned to recognize that particular quality of fear during her years of running. It meant danger was close. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Patterson was standing in her doorway, wringing her hands as she watched the commotion outside.
What's happening? Sarah asked.
Raiders, the older woman said, her voice tight with worry. They hit the Morrison Ranch last night. Killed 2 hands, stole everything they could carry, and burned what they couldn't. Sarah felt a familiar chill run down her spine. She'd encountered raiders before, during her time on the Outer Worlds. They were parasites who preyed on isolated settlements, taking what they wanted by force and leaving death in their wake.
How many? She found herself asking. Sheriff thinks maybe 20, based on the tracks. They're well armed and organized.
Mrs. Patterson looked at her with frightened eyes.
People are talking about evacuating to New Dallas, but even there. She didn't need to finish.
New Dallas had maybe 200 residents and 1 sheriff.
Against 20 determined raiders, the town's chances weren't good. Sarah stepped outside into the morning chaos.
People were loading belongings into vehicles, arguing about whether to stay or go, and generally acting like a community coming apart at the seams. She spotted Sheriff Martinez near the town's small communications array, speaking intently into a handheld device. Negative, control, he was saying as she approached.
No available units for at least 6 weeks. We're on our own.
He clicked off the communicator and noticed Sarah approaching.
Morning. I don't suppose you slept through all the excitement? Mrs. Patterson filled me in. 20 raiders? Maybe more.
They've been hitting settlements all along the outer ring. Professional operation, military vehicles, coordinated tactics, high-end weapons. His expression was grim.
These aren't your usual desperados looking for easy money. Any idea what they want?
Same thing, raiders always want: anything valuable they can carry, anyone useful they can sell.
His jaw tightened.
Dr. Rodriguez and her research team are out at Station 7.
If the raiders know about them. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach.
Carmen Rodriguez had shown her kindness last night, treated her like a human being instead of a potential threat.
The idea of her falling into raiders' hands brought back memories Sarah had spent 3 years trying to forget. How long until they reached the station?
If they left Morrison's place at dawn, maybe 6 hours. The research station has some defenses, but nothing that would stop a determined assault. Around them, the exodus from town was picking up speed. Families were piling into ground cars and heading toward New Dallas, hoping the larger settlement's walls and numbers would provide protection. Sarah watched them go and felt the familiar urge to join them, to blend into the crowd and disappear before the shooting started. "You should go too," Martinez said, following her gaze. "Get to New Dallas, maybe catch the next transport off-world.
This isn't your fight."
The same words she'd told herself last night. The same logic that had kept her alive and anonymous for 3 years.
Don't get involved. Don't take sides. Don't be anyone's hero. What about you? I've got a job to do. Sworn oath. He touched the star-shaped badge on his chest. Some things you don't run from, even when the smart money says you should. Sarah understood that kind of conviction.
She'd felt it once, before everything went wrong. Before she learned that oaths could be twisted into weapons and duty could become a chain that dragged you down into darkness. 1 man against 20 raiders.
That's not duty, Sheriff. That's suicide. Maybe. But it's still what I have to do.
He started to walk away, then paused and looked back at her. For what it's worth, last night was the first time in months I've seen someone stand up for what's right just because it was right.
Made me remember why I took this job in the first place.
After he left, Sarah stood in the emptying street, watching the last of the evacuation vehicles disappear in clouds of red dust. The rational choice was clear: find transportation to New Dallas, lay low until the crisis passed, then move on to another world where her past couldn't catch up with her. Instead, she found herself walking toward the edge of town, where a small maintenance shed housed the settlement's emergency supplies. Her military training was taking over, analyzing the tactical situation despite her attempts to stay disconnected.
20 raiders with military-grade equipment. 1 sheriff with whatever weapons a frontier settlement could afford.
Dr. Rodriguez and her team trapped at an isolated research station with minimal defenses. The math was simple, and it didn't favor the good guys. Sarah had been in situations like this before, during her time as a commander in the Colonial Defense Force. She'd led desperate missions against impossible odds, somehow finding ways to turn disadvantage into victory. But that was before she learned what happened to officers who asked too many questions about their orders. The memory surfaced unbidden, the bridge of the UES Valiant, alarms blaring as enemy ships closed in. Her crew looking to her for orders, trusting her to get them home alive. The classified mission parameters that made no sense, the targeting data that seemed wrong, the growing certainty that something was terribly amiss. She'd followed orders anyway. Right up until the moment she realized those orders were designed to fail. Sarah shook off the memory and focused on the present situation. Whatever had happened in the past, Dr. Rodriguez was in danger now. A good person who'd shown her kindness was about to face the worst humanity had to offer, and the only thing standing between her and 20 armed raiders was one frontier sheriff with more courage than sense. The maintenance shed was unlocked, typical for a small settlement where trust was still more common than paranoia. Inside, Sarah found what she was looking for: emergency supplies, basic tools, and, most importantly, a detailed topographical map of the region around Research Station 7. The station was built into a mesa about 40 kilometers from town, accessible only by a winding road that switchbacked up the cliff face. Defensively, it was actually a strong position: limited approaches, elevated firing positions, clear fields of view. The problem was that it had been designed to keep out curious wildlife, not determined human attackers. Sarah studied the map, her tactical training automatically identifying weak points and alternative approaches. The raiders would probably come up the main road, expecting minimal resistance. But there were other ways to reach the station: game trails used by the local fauna, maintenance access points for the atmospheric processors, even the possibility of a climbing approach up the less steep sections of the mesa. She was so focused on the map that she didn't hear the footsteps until Sheriff Martinez cleared his throat behind her. "Planning a vacation?" he asked mildly. Sarah didn't look up from the map. "These raiders, you said they were professional. Military equipment, coordinated tactics." "That's right." "Then, they'll have done reconnaissance. They'll know about the research station's defenses, its access points, probably even how many people are inside." "Most likely. So charging up that road on horseback like something out of an old western isn't going to accomplish anything except getting you killed." Martinez moved closer to study the map over her shoulder. "You got a better idea?" Sarah pointed to a section of the mesa about 2 kilometers from the station. "Service tunnel here, built for maintenance access to the atmospheric processors. Comes up inside the station's perimeter. If someone could get inside before the attack, help organize the defense." "Someone like you?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her, the same feeling she'd had on the bridge of the Valiant when she realized she could either follow orders or do what was right, but not both. "I'm just passing through," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "That's what you keep saying." "But people who are just passing through don't study tactical maps and plan infiltration routes." Sarah finally looked up at him, seeing understanding in his weathered features. "You know, don't you? About who I was." Martinez nodded slowly. "I had my suspicions after last night. The way you moved, the way you handled yourself. This morning I ran your biometric data through some channels I still have access to from my old job." "And?" "Commander Sarah Chen, formerly of the UES Valiant. Decorated officer with an exemplary service record right up until 3 years ago, when you disappeared after testifying in a closed military tribunal." Sarah felt her carefully constructed anonymity crumbling around her. "If you know who I am, then you know why I can't help you. I'm a fugitive, Martinez. Getting involved in this will only make things worse for everyone. The way I read it, you're a whistleblower who tried to do the right thing and got burned for it. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Tell that to the families of the crew members who died because I questioned my orders." Martinez was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with the kind of gentle authority that suggested he'd had this conversation before. "I don't know what happened on your ship, Sarah. But I know what I saw last night: someone who was willing to put herself at risk to help a stranger. That's not the action of someone who's given up on doing the right thing."
You don't understand.
The tribunal, the investigation, they made it clear that asking questions, defying orders, was the same as treason. People died because I hesitated, because I thought I knew better than my superiors. Or maybe people died because your superiors were wrong, and you were the only one honest enough to say so. Sarah stared at the map, seeing not the tactical situation but the faces of her crew. Good people who'd trusted her judgment, who'd followed her into battle believing she would bring them home. The ones who hadn't made it back haunted her dreams, their voices asking why she hadn't been better, faster, smarter. Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. I failed them. I failed everyone who counted on me. So you're going to let Dr. Rodriguez and her team die because you're afraid of failing again? The question hit like a physical blow. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to shut out the image of Carmen Rodriguez's grateful smile from the night before. But Martinez wasn't finished. I'd been a lawman for 15 years, Sarah. I've seen a lot of good people do nothing because they were afraid of making mistakes. I've also seen what happens when the only person willing to act is someone who's already made every mistake in the book and learned from them. What if I make things worse? What if trying to help gets everyone killed? What if not trying guarantees it? Sarah opened her eyes and found Martinez watching her with an expression of patient understanding. Around them, the maintenance shed felt small and confining, like the bridge of a ship under attack. But this time, she had a choice. This time, she could walk away. How long until the raiders reached the station? 5 hours, maybe less. The service tunnel, how long to reach it on foot? 2 hours if you push hard. But, Sarah, even if you can get inside and help them hold off the initial attack, what then? 20 raiders with military equipment aren't going to give up and go home. Sarah was already calculating supply requirements, defensive positions, and potential escape routes. Her mind was working with the cold efficiency of her military training, turning an impossible situation into a series of manageable problems. Then, we make sure they don't want to stick around. Raiders are predators, they look for easy targets. Make them pay too high a price, and they'll find someone else to rob. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the frontier sheriff exterior to the man underneath. There was steel there, and experience, and the kind of quiet competence that came from years of standing between good people and the darkness that wanted to consume them. You're not really just a small-town sheriff, are you? A slight smile creased his weathered features. Colonel Jack Martinez, Colonial Marines. Retired. What's a retired Marine colonel doing keeping the peace in a town of 50 people? Same thing a decorated Navy commander is doing in a frontier bar fight, I'd guess. Trying to find a way to live with the past. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of guilt and self-recrimination she'd carried for 3 years. Maybe Martinez was right. Maybe running away from her failures wasn't the same as learning from them. All right, Colonel. You've got yourself a partner. But we do this my way, no heroics, no suicide charges. We get in, we organize the defense, and we make those raiders pay so dearly for every meter that they decide this particular score isn't worth it. Martinez extended his hand, and Sarah shook it, feeling the calluses of someone who'd spent years holding weapons and making hard decisions. Welcome back to the fight, Commander. They spent the next hour planning their approach. Martinez would take the main road on horseback, making enough noise to draw attention while Sarah infiltrated through the service tunnel. Once inside, she would help prepare the station's defenses while Martinez coordinated with the raiders, trying to buy time and gauge their intentions. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was better than trying to face 20 armed raiders in open combat. And, for the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt the familiar focus of command settling over her like a comfortable coat. Whatever else had gone wrong in her past, she was good at this, taking impossible situations and finding ways to make them possible. The service tunnel entrance was exactly where the map indicated, hidden behind a screen of native vegetation about 2 kilometers from Research Station 7. Sarah checked her equipment one final time, basic survival gear, the sidearm she'd finally allowed herself to carry again, and a small communications device Martinez had given her. Test, his voice crackled through the earpiece. I read you, Sheriff. Remember, don't try to be a hero in there. Get them organized, get them ready, but don't take unnecessary risks," says the man who was planning to face 20 raiders alone.
A laugh came through the comm point taken.
"Good hunting, Commander." The tunnel was dark and cramped, clearly not designed for regular human use. Sarah made her way through it carefully, using a small flashlight to navigate around maintenance equipment and atmospheric processing machinery. The air was stale and tasted of metal and ozone. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, she saw light ahead, the tunnel's exit into the research station's lower levels. Sarah emerged into a storage room filled with scientific equipment and supplies. Above her, she could hear voices and the hum of machinery that indicated normal station operations.
They didn't know yet.
Carmen Rodriguez and her team were going about their daily research, unaware that 20 armed raiders were bearing down on them with murder and kidnapping in mind.
In a few hours, their peaceful scientific mission would become a desperate fight for survival. Unless Sarah could prevent it.
She made her way through the station's lower levels, getting oriented and identifying key defensive positions.
The station was larger than she'd expected, built into the mesa's structure with multiple levels and secure laboratories.
It would be defensible, but only if the defenders knew what they were doing. Sarah found the main elevator and rode it to the upper levels, where she could hear normal conversation and activity. She straightened her shoulders, checked her appearance in the elevator's polished surface, and prepared to convince a group of scientists that their lives were in immediate danger.
The elevator doors opened onto a scene of peaceful scientific activity.
Researchers in lab coats moved between workstations, analyzing samples and discussing findings. Carmen Rodriguez was at the far end of the room, examining something under a microscope. Sarah stepped out of the elevator, and every conversation in the room gradually died as people noticed the armed stranger who'd appeared among them. "Dr. Rodriguez," Sarah called out, her voice carrying the authority of command despite her civilian clothes. Carmen looked up, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to alarm as she took in Sarah's gear and serious demeanor.
"Sarah? What are you doing here? How did you get inside the station? There's no time to explain everything. You and your team are in immediate danger.
Armed raiders are heading this way, and they'll be here within the next few hours." The room erupted in questions and protests, but Sarah raised her voice to cut through the chaos. "I know this is hard to believe, but I need you to listen carefully.
My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a former military officer. Sheriff Martinez sent me here to help organize your defense because we don't have time to evacuate everyone safely."
Dr. Rodriguez was staring at her with wide eyes.
"Raiders?
But we're just scientists.
We don't have anything worth stealing."
"You have vehicles, communications equipment, supplies, and, most importantly, you have people."
"Raiders don't just steal things, Dr. Rodriguez. They steal people too."
The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah could see the moment when the reality of their situation hit home, the color draining from faces, the sudden understanding of exactly how much danger they were in.
"What do we do?"
Carmen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked around the room, taking in the frightened faces of people who'd probably never imagined they'd find themselves in a situation like this. They were scientists, not soldiers. But they were also human beings with the capacity for courage and determination when the situation demanded it.
"We survive," Sarah said simply. "We organize, we prepare, and we make sure these raiders regret the day they decided to mess with Research Station 7.
The transformation of Research Station 7 from a peaceful scientific facility into a fortress took place with the kind of organized urgency that Sarah remembered from her military days. Within 2 hours, the scientists had become an unlikely but determined defensive force, following her instructions with the dedication they usually reserved for their research. Dr. Carmen Rodriguez proved to be an excellent second-in-command, translating Sarah's tactical concepts into terms the researchers could understand and helping coordinate the preparations. The station's 12-person team worked together like a well-oiled machine, their scientific training serving them well when it came to following complex procedures under pressure. "Barricades are in place on levels 1 and 2, reported Dr. Kim, the team's geologist. He was a quiet man in his 30s who'd surprised everyone by demonstrating a natural aptitude for defensive positions.
Emergency supplies have been moved to the secure laboratory, added Dr. Patel, a biochemist who'd taken charge of organizing their resources. Food, water, medical supplies, and communication equipment. If we have to fall back, we can hold out there for days. Sarah nodded, checking her handheld device for any word from Sheriff Martinez. The plan called for him to make contact with the raiders when they reached the base of the mesa, trying to determine their intentions while buying the station more time to prepare. Any word from the sheriff? Carmen asked, echoing Sarah's thoughts. Not yet. He'll contact us when the communication device crackled to life, Martinez's voice cutting through the static. Station 7, this is Martinez. The party has arrived, and they're not here for a friendly visit. Sarah keyed the transmitter. Copy, Sheriff. What's the situation? 22 raiders, military-grade vehicles and weapons. They've got powered armor and what looks like breaching charges. Professional operation, like we thought. Demands? They want the station's research data, all supplies, and... Martinez's voice grew grim. They want the female researchers turned over to them. They're giving us 1 hour to comply. The blood drained from Carmen's face, and several of the other researchers looked sick. Sarah felt the familiar cold anger that had always preceded her most dangerous missions, the kind of fury that made her willing to walk into hell itself if it meant protecting innocent people. Tell them we need time to consider their terms, Sarah said into the transmitter. Try to keep them talking. We're almost ready here. Copy that, Commander. Martinez out. Sarah looked around at the faces of the research team, good people who'd come to this distant world to expand human knowledge, not to fight for their lives against raiders and slavers. They were scared, but they were also determined. She could see it in their eyes, the same resolution she'd seen in her naval crews when the situation looked hopeless, but surrender wasn't an option. All right, everyone. You've heard the terms. You know what these people want to do to you. She paused, letting that sink in. But, you also know what we've accomplished in the last 2 hours. You've turned this research station into a fortress, and you've done it better than most military units I've served with. Dr. Kim straightened his shoulders. What do you need us to do, Commander? The title felt strange after 3 years of anonymity, but also strangely comforting. These people were looking to her for leadership, trusting her to get them through this crisis. For the first time since the Valiant, Sarah felt like she might be worthy of that trust. We stick to the plan. First defensive line is the main entrance, make them pay for every meter. If they breach that, we fall back to level 2. If they breach that, we retreat to the secure lab and make them regret ever coming here. What about negotiations? Carmen asked. Maybe we can find some middle ground. Sarah shook her head. There is no middle ground with people like this. They see weakness, they exploit it. They see strength, they look for easier targets. She met each person's eyes in turn. We show them strength. The next 30 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah made final adjustments to their defensive positions while the research team checked and rechecked their assigned roles. Most of them had never held weapons before yesterday, but they'd learned quickly. Desperation, Sarah reflected, was an excellent teacher. The first sign of trouble came from the station's external sensors. Movement at the base of the access road, Dr. Patel reported from the monitoring station. Multiple vehicles heading up the switchbacks. Through the reinforced windows, Sarah could see dust clouds rising from the mesa's base as the raider convoy began its ascent. There were 6 vehicles in total, 4 ground cars that looked like they'd been armored and modified, and 2 larger trucks that probably carried the bulk of their forces. Sheriff Martinez to Station 7, came the crackling voice over the comm. They're moving. I tried to delay them, but their leader isn't interested in negotiation. Copy, Sheriff. Are you clear? Affirmative. I'm in position to provide support if needed, but stay focused on your own situation. Sarah clicked off the transmitter and turned to address her unlikely army one final time. This is it, people. Remember your training, remember your positions, and remember that you're fighting for more than just your own lives. You're fighting for every innocent person these raiders might victimize if we let them succeed here.
The sound of engines grew louder as the convoy approached the station's main entrance. Sarah took her position behind the reinforced barricade they'd constructed in the entry corridor, checking her sidearm one final time. Around her, the research team members settled into their assigned positions with the grim determination of people who had no choice but to succeed. The engines stopped. For a moment, there was silence except for the hum of the station's life support systems and the distant whisper of wind across the mesa's surface. Then, a voice called out from beyond the entrance, electronically amplified and filled with casual arrogance. "Research Station 7, this is Captain Voss of the Free Company of Kepler. You have had sufficient time to consider our terms. Send out the research data, supplies, and female personnel as requested, and the rest of you will be allowed to depart unharmed." Sarah keyed her own calm system, patching into the station's external speakers. "This is Station 7. Your terms are rejected. Find somewhere else to steal from." Laughter echoed from the speakers outside. "I had hoped you would be reasonable." "Very well, we will take what we want by force. Perhaps the experience will teach you the value of cooperation." The first explosion came without warning. A breaching charge detonated against the station's main entrance, filling the air with smoke and debris. Through the swirling dust, Sarah could see armored figures advancing into the breach, their weapons trained on anything that moved. "Hold fire," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying over the noise. "Let them get closer." The raiders moved with the confident precision of professionals, advancing in coordinated teams while checking corners and potential ambush points. They expected resistance, but they also expected to overwhelm it quickly through superior firepower and numbers. They were about to learn that sometimes superior firepower wasn't enough. "Now!" Sarah called out. The research station erupted in defensive fire. The scientists had spent hours learning to use the hunting rifles and emergency weapons from the station's armory, and their scientific precision served them well when it came to aim shots at close range. 2 raiders went down in the first volley, their powered armor sparking as emergency systems failed. The others dove for cover, shouting orders and calling for support. "Fall back to Checkpoint Alpha," Sarah ordered, and her improvised army moved with the discipline they'd practiced all afternoon. The station's layout worked in their favor: narrow corridors and multiple levels that broke up the raiders' numerical advantage. The fighting moved through the station level by level, each defensive position costing the raiders time, casualties, and ammunition. Sarah found herself moving between positions, offering encouragement and tactical advice while fighting alongside people who'd probably never imagined they could be warriors. Dr. Kim proved to be a natural marksman, his geological training helping him judge angles and distances. Dr. Patel used her knowledge of the station's systems to cut power to sections the raiders had occupied, forcing them to advance in darkness. Carmen coordinated the defense with calm efficiency, making sure everyone had ammunition and medical attention when needed. But, gradually, inevitably, the raiders' superior numbers and equipment began to tell. The first defensive line fell after an hour of fighting. The second line held for 30 minutes before being overwhelmed. By the time Sarah ordered a retreat to the secure laboratory, half the research team had suffered injuries, and their ammunition was running dangerously low. "How many of them are left?" Carmen asked as they sealed the laboratory's reinforced door behind them. Sarah checked the tactical display on her handheld device. "Maybe 15, but they're getting smarter about their approaches." "Professional adaptation under fire. How long can we hold out here?" Before Sarah could answer, Captain Voss's voice echoed through the station's comm system. "Dr. Rodriguez, I know you can hear me. You've put up an admirable resistance, but it's over. Surrender now, and I give you my word that your people will be treated well." Carmen keyed the transmitter with steady hands. "Your word isn't worth much, Captain. We know what you do to the people you capture." "Ah, but you're wrong about that. We're businessmen, Dr. Rodriguez. Dead researchers are worthless to us. We need you alive and functional." The implications sent a chill through the laboratory. Sarah had encountered slavers before. They were often worse than simple murderers because they kept their victims alive for purposes that didn't bear thinking about. "We need options," she said quietly to Carmen. "Is there another way out of here?"
Emergency escape tunnel, but it leads to the mesa's edge. 50-meter drop to the rocks below. Better than the alternative. That's when Dr.
Patel looked up from her monitoring station with wide eyes.
Commander, you need to see this. Sarah moved to look at the external sensors.
On the display, she could see new movement at the base of the mesa, more vehicles approaching at high speed, their configuration different from the Raiders' modified ground cars.
Who the hell is that? Carmen asked. Sarah studied the approaching vehicles with growing amazement.
They were military transports, moving with the kind of coordination that suggested professional drivers and serious intent. As she watched, figures began deploying from the vehicles, armed and armored figures who moved with unmistakable military precision. Her communicator crackled to life, but this time it wasn't Martinez's voice.
Station 7, this is Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, 3rd Battalion, Colonial Defense Force. We have your position surrounded. Prepare to receive reinforcements. Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the chest.
The Colonial Defense Force, her old service, the organization that had branded her a traitor and forced her into exile. They were here, on this remote world, at exactly the moment she needed them most.
Sarah.
Carmen was looking at her with concern.
What's wrong? This is good news, right? We're saved.
Before Sarah could answer, Captain Voss's voice cut through the comm channels again, but this time it carried a note of surprise and anger.
This is Captain Voss. Station 7 is under lawful salvage by the Free Company of Kepler. Stand down immediately or face the consequences. Captain Voss, came Harrison's calm reply, this is Colonel Harrison.
You are engaged in piracy, kidnapping, and attempted murder against research personnel under Colonial Protection Mandate 247B. You have 30 seconds to lay down your arms and surrender.
You have no jurisdiction here, Colonel. This is an independent world. Actually, we do.
Dr. Rodriguez and her team are conducting research under a colonial science grant, which places them under our protection.
Surrender now, or we will take you by force. Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, Sarah could see the CDF forces moving up the mesa with professional efficiency.
The Raiders were caught between the approaching military units and the research station they'd been trying to capture, exactly the kind of tactical nightmare that ended careers and lives.
The battle that followed was brief and decisive.
The Raiders, faced with superior numbers and equipment, tried to fight their way to their vehicles.
A few made it, most didn't.
Within 20 minutes, the sound of gunfire had faded to silence, replaced by the crisp voices of CDF personnel conducting post-combat operations.
Station 7, this is Colonel Harrison. Area secure. Preparing to enter your facility. Sarah looked at Carmen and the other researchers, seeing relief and exhaustion on their faces. They'd survived.
They'd held off 22 professional raiders long enough for rescue to arrive, and they'd done it through courage, determination, and teamwork.
But, for Sarah, survival might be more complicated. Commander Chen?
Carmen was looking at her with growing understanding.
That's your old unit, isn't it? The people you've been running from. Sarah nodded, her throat tight.
After 3 years of anonymity, she was about to come face to face with the organization that had destroyed her career and driven her into exile. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent so long running from the CDF that she'd never imagined they might one day be the answer to her prayers. The laboratory door's seal hissed as it opened, and Colonel Harrison stepped inside. He was exactly what Sarah expected from a CDF field commander, tall, competent-looking, with the kind of bearing that suggested he was accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. His eyes swept the room, taking in the makeshift defensive positions and injured researchers, before settling on Sarah with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle.
Dr. Rodriguez, I presume, he said to Carmen. Yes, Colonel. Thank you for arriving when you did. I don't think we could have held out much longer.
Actually, Dr. Rodriguez, your defensive preparations were exceptional. My tactical officer estimates you inflicted at least 40% casualties on a superior force while suffering minimal losses yourselves.
That level of coordination doesn't happen by accident.
His gaze shifted to Sarah.
Someone with military experience was clearly in charge of your defense. Sarah straightened, feeling 3 years of civilian disguise falling away like an old coat. Colonel Harrison. Commander Chen. His tone was neutral, professional. I have to admit, when my intelligence officer told me you might be here, I had difficulty believing it. Sarah Chen, the decorated hero of the Proxima campaign, hiding out on a frontier world. Former Commander Chen, Sarah corrected. I resigned my commission. Actually, you didn't. You went absent without leave after testifying in a classified tribunal. There's a significant difference. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. AWOL. Deserter. The terms that would define her legally and professionally for the rest of her life, if the CDF chose to pursue them. Carmen stepped forward, her voice sharp with indignation. Colonel, I don't know what history you have with Sarah, but she just saved all of our lives. She organized our defense, taught us how to fight, and kept us alive until you arrived. If she's some kind of fugitive, then I'd say the Colonial Defense Force needs to reconsider who they classify as criminals. Colonel Harrison looked between Sarah and Carmen with the expression of someone recalculating a complex equation. Dr. Rodriguez, are you saying that Commander Chen organized your entire defense? Not just organized it, she led it. We're scientists, Colonel, not soldiers. Without her, we would have surrendered or died in the first 10 minutes. Sarah watched Harrison's face, seeing the moment when military necessity began to outweigh bureaucratic concerns. The CDF valued results above all else, and the results here spoke for themselves. Commander Chen, Harrison said formally, I'm prepared to offer you a field commission to assist in securing this sector. There have been multiple raider attacks throughout the outer colonies, and we need experienced officers to coordinate defensive operations. Sir, I'm not sure I understand. I'm saying that the Colonial Defense Force has need of your skills, and you've just demonstrated that those skills remain sharp despite your extended leave of absence. Sarah felt the world shifting around her, the careful anonymity of 3 years dissolving into something she hadn't expected, a second chance. What about the tribunal? The charges? The tribunal's findings were classified, but I've been briefed on the general situation. You questioned orders that later proved to be based on flawed intelligence. The investigation that followed your testimony uncovered significant corruption in the sector command structure. Harrison's expression softened slightly. You were right, Commander. The people you thought were your enemies were actually the criminals. The laboratory was completely silent except for the hum of life support systems. Sarah felt Carmen's hand squeeze her shoulder, offering support and encouragement. Around them, the research team watched with expressions of hope and concern. If I accept this commission, Sarah said slowly, what happens next? Next, we finish cleaning up this raider problem. Then, we figure out how to keep the outer colonies safe from future attacks. And, eventually, if you're interested, we discuss your permanent return to active duty. Sarah looked around the laboratory at the faces of the people she'd helped save. Scientists who'd shown more courage in one day than many soldiers displayed in entire careers. People who'd trusted her leadership when they had every reason to be afraid. For 3 years, she'd been running from the memory of failure, convinced that her judgment couldn't be trusted and her leadership was flawed. But these people were alive because she'd made the choice to stand and fight rather than run away. Maybe Sheriff Martinez had been right. Maybe learning from failure was different from being defined by it. Colonel Harrison, Sarah said, her voice steady and, sure, I accept your offer. The smile that crossed Harrison's face was genuine. Welcome back to the service, Commander. We have a lot of work to do. As the CDF medics began treating the injured researchers and the intelligence teams started processing the captured raiders, Sarah found herself standing at one of the laboratory windows, looking out over the Kepler landscape. The red dust and orange sunlight that had seemed so alien when she arrived now looked like home. Carmen joined her at the window, her arm in a sling but her spirits obviously high. So, what happens now? Now we make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. We build defenses, train local forces, and show the raiders that the outer colonies aren't easy targets anymore. And, after that? Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years.
After that, we see what other impossible situations need someone foolish enough to volunteer for them.
Carmen laughed.
You know, when I thanked you for saving my life yesterday, I had no idea I was talking to a war hero.
I'm not a hero, Carmen.
I'm just someone who finally stopped running from her past long enough to build a future. Through the window, Sarah could see Sheriff Martinez talking with Colonel Harrison, probably coordinating the transition of authority and discussing long-term security arrangements. The frontier lawman who'd helped her find her courage was ensuring that the outer colonies would have the protection they needed. As the orange sun of Kepler 442b began to set over the mesa, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Saracen finally understood what redemption actually meant. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending mistakes had never happened. It was about using those experiences to become someone better, someone worthy of the trust others placed in you. She'd spent 3 years fleeing her history, convinced that her failures defined her. But history, she realized, wasn't just about the past, it was about what you chose to do with the lessons it taught you. And, for the first time since the UES Valiant, Sarah was ready to make history rather than run from it. The stars were beginning to appear in Kepler's alien sky, but they no longer looked cold and distant. They looked like possibilities, like destinations waiting to be reached by someone brave enough to chart a course toward them.
Sarah Chen, commander in the Colonial Defense Force, stood ready to answer that call.